the second one, Mckayla Maroney.
Mm-hmm.
So Mckayla Maroney, she went to see Larry Nassar when she was 13 years old. The first thing that Larry Nassar, according to Mckayla, said to her was to put on shorts with no underwear because it makes it easier for treatment.
Jeez.
And he said within minutes,
Christ.
he was fingering her with no gloves. And then Nassar gave Mckayla Maroney a sleeping pill in Tokyo, summer 2016. So not the Olympics, but I guess another competition. And he gave her a sleeping pill on the flight there. And then later that night, he said, Mckayla Maroney said he was on top of her, quote unquote, for hours molesting her. And she said, I thought I was going to die that night. So that is what happened to Mckayla Maroney. And
that's insane.
Similar things happened to hundreds of other girls where they were touched very inappropriately, had Larry Nassar's fingers inside them. And I feel like actually sharing what this guy did, we need to share some of the actual abuse so that you can get a picture of, this guy. And keep in mind, the girls that are coming forward now in front of Congress and on the documentary, they were much younger when all of this was happening. And so they're getting fingered and getting rubbed and massaged on their private parts, and also, being brought into places where there's not other people around. They're alone. Mckayla Maroney describes walking around a hotel room alone at night after this happened, being like, what the fuck? And so the details make me angry, and they're fucked up. But a lot of times with sexual assault in different people's minds means different things. And so to actually have a picture of what this guy is doing, to me, is essential, because it's good to know, and not good to know, but it's like a lot of time there's vague language used around this stuff, and when the victims feel confident enough to share in detail what is happening so that it doesn't happen to other girls, I feel like sharing it is making the story more powerful, and it leaves less to the imagination, where how fucked up this guy is.
Yeah, the more that comes out, the better. For this, even if it's brutal, I think the more that comes out, the better, so that people can hear what happened. So
did you get to the point in the documentary with the part about Bella and Marta Caroli?
They were the coaches who came over from Romania.
Yeah, they're the national team coordinators for USAG. They controlled the selection process for USA Gymnastics, basically the whole operation. And this part of the documentary was interesting to me because it kind of paints a background view of how Bella and Marta came onto the scene. So they were originally gymnasts in Romania, the Eastern Bloc, which was notorious for being harsh and strict. And they would slap their athletes, beat their athletes. They'd call them fat pig. Like, they were calling young girls like fat pigs and names and insulting them. They're also slapping them. And so the Eastern Bloc, Romania, USSR, they all had very intense, abusive approaches to how they created athletes. And what's also interesting is that
it was accepted. There's one guy who said, like, oh, it's accepted if you get slapped, or
it's accepted.
Whatever. If you get a
Yeah, and what's also interesting is that before, there was a girl from Romania, I'm forgetting her name, but she won the 1976 Olympics. She medaled, and she was clearly the best one. And she was also a teenager. She was a young girl, and she was from Romania. Before that, in the 1950s and the 1960s, almost all women in gymnastics were older women. They were like in their 20s and 30s. And so the Eastern Bloc popularized young girls going into gymnastics from a very young age, like starting at 5 years old and then starting to compete at 13, 14, 15 years old for the Olympics, because they were more pliable, they were, more docile. And before Romania and the Soviet Union started putting young girls in the Olympics and succeeding and medaling and winning everything, it was women in their 20s and 30s. So they kind of changed the culture. And so Berta and Marta Caroli were the national coordinators for USA Gymnastics. They were running the show. They were running the training camps. They were choosing which gymnasts got on the team. They were choosing who didn't make it to the Olympics. And they were clearly very heavily influenced by this abusive, harsh Eastern Bloc mentality. They brought that into the United States because there was so much talent that they felt like they could tap into with the style from Romania.
And so, that's another part of the recipe. So now they're young girls. Not only is he in a position of power, but now he has younger girls that might not know enough to speak up or know what, he could take advantage of them, basically. Because like you said, girls started to be smaller and younger because they thought that that's like the perfect that's like the perfect demographic to be a gymnast, like a smaller body and between like teenage years, college years. So that was another way that he was enabled to do all of his acts on them.